There's just something so bewitching about cussing so much. Content is explicit and not suitable for all listeners. You have been warned.
Welcome! You are listening to Bewitch Banter with two best friends.
One skeptical, looking at you, Ames, over there.
And our resident believer, Krista.
Talk about the universe, its beauty, and all its mysticism.
It is a beautiful universe, but a lot of what we talk about here I tend to think is magical thinking.
Really though, we talk about the spooky, spiritual, some wacky religions, cults, and the paranormal.
And we're finally not going to shit on the Catholics today because we are talking about what, Krista?
We are covering someone very magical, whom I consider at least, a dear friend of mine from college, Courtney Jameson, who is a practicing witch. And no, she's not Wiccan. We got that wrong originally in Bewitch Banter. Go figure. Us getting factual things wrong? Never, ever. Never on Bewitch Banter. But Courtney is not only a badass bitch, but she is so empowering. She's a writer. She has her own store called Crimson Sage AZ, and essentially it's an apothecary, which I learned from our interview that apparently you cannot call yourself an apothecary in Arizona legally. Some shit with the olden days, I guess. Anyhow, Courtney brings us honestly, she brings us back down to earth, I think, speaking of down to earth, with just women taking back our power through whatever spiritual practice it is. And it's been an honor to reconnect with her. So super, super excited. We hope y'all enjoy. Take some magic away from it, because I sure did. And happy freaking 2023, y'all.
Happy New Year!
Hi, Bewitches. Happy New Year. Can y'all believe it's already 2023? I know I can't. But since the beginning of last year, for those of y'all who do listen to the show, you know that I began a meditation practice, and I am so fortunate to have the most perfect meditation space. And that is despite Amy's cynicism, because she helped me design that space. So I'll give her a little bit of credit for that. But something was definitely still missing. But then I remembered my friend Courtney, who's a practicing witch. She opened Crimson Sage AZ a few years ago for anyone looking for organic, handcrafted goods. So I got myself the most beautiful, handmade, personalized pentagram that Courtney customized just for me. I put it right on my altar, and my meditation space was finally complete, you guys. I am not kidding. Courtney's shop is incredible. She's got so many cool things in there, like ritual tools, metal alchemy, herbal goods, functional art, and natural skin craft. And I could tell you, I could use some skincare right now. But to complete your own meditation space, visit crimsonsageaz.com. Crimson Sage AZ, old world magic for contemporary times. That's crimsonsageaz.com. Welcome to a very special edition of Bewitch Banter with my dear friend Courtney Jameson, who we went to college together. Mm-hmm. English 101. Remember, what was the guy's name? He was dorky as fuck.
I don't know, but yeah, he was super quiet, super dorky.
Damon or Damien or something?
I don't know. He's definitely like a grad student, yeah, for sure.
But we hit it off immediately, and we go to lunch together. And
you were my first friend at ASU.
Yeah, same, actually. Yeah. And then we
talk. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And watch One Tree Hill.
Yeah, oh my god. I saw that actor somewhere recently, and I was like, holy shit.
I know.
I remember what he was on, some soap or something, and I was like, oh my god, One Tree Hill.
I never ever watched that show except for when I would come over to your dorm room, smoke in your bathroom with your shower on and the towel under the door.
Oh my god. And then, oh my god, good times.
Yeah.
That's all we can say on undergrads.
Yeah.
But Courtney, over the years, has also morphed into an amazing creative, and well, always was, not morphed into, but has built a business called Crimson Sage AZ Apothecary, right? Did I get that right this time?
It's just Crimson Sage LLC.
Thank you.
We do go by Crimson Sage Apothecary, and then our website is crimsonsageaz.com. We did have apothecary in our business name many years ago,
Oh,
but
okay, you switched it. Okay.
yeah, apparently it's illegal to have apothecary in your business name in the state of Arizona unless you're a licensed pharmacist. So we actually,
That's from the
what
brothel
happened
days.
to us, yeah, what happened to us is we actually got harassed at this market, the very first market we ever did, at the Anthem Fall Festival. And this guy next to us selling freaking kaleidoscopes of all things. He's like, first of all, he accuses us of selling snake oil and all these things. And then he reports us to the Department of Pharmaceuticals in Arizona. We got a cease and desist to change our business name and take apothecary out.
You're
So
kidding.
no, and I ended up calling the director and talking to him, and he was like, we don't really see these on our radar unless somebody brings it to our attention. And he's sort of not so directly
Advised.
confirmed that it might have been that guy. Well then, so I get the business name changed and everything, but we're
God.
still working on the website change because this
Yeah,
is
it takes time.
expensive and it takes time to do all this.
Yeah.
So then we end up getting a call from the director again, and he's like, the guy came back and brought it to our attention. You still haven't changed your website. So he was literally looking in on us too. So yeah, it was a whole thing. So
Okay,
basically,
first of all, male version of Kieran, what are you doing with your time?
exactly. Oh no.
Like,
exactly. And I mean, like, it was such a pain, and it's such a antiquated law too, because apothecary means so much more now, and really no licensed pharmacists. I mean, very few are even still using that in their name.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So it's ridiculous. So we ended up having to go to Crimson Sage LLC, and then because crimsonsage.com was taken already, we had to do crimsonsageaz.com. So it's just been
what a nightmare.
a thing, yeah.
Sorry,
So,
you didn't know you had to go through all that.
no, yeah, it was.
That makes sense when you're like, hey, this is the name. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we persevered and pushed over it and became successful afterwards. So,
wow.
Screw you, kaleidoscope guy.
Yeah, kaleidoscope guy. Well, that said, tell Bewitch Banter listeners what type of things you offer, because I can tell you from firsthand experience. I got one of your witch boxes, the mystery boxes, and about 2-ish years ago, and it has helped me get through my divorce and just start the inner work of healing that needed to happen a long time ago. But really, Courtney's box was a catalyst for making me do that.
I love that. Yeah. So we basically sell occult and esoteric items focused on ritual and healing. A lot of our focus is on Celtic history, because that is our ancestry too. But we do kind of open up more because we're also very interested in mythology and the occult and all of that. So we open up to other things. But we sell everything from handmade ritual tools, ritual box sets, skincare, metal alchemy, herbal alchemy. I mean, it's an apothecary.
Yeah.
It's a whole emporium.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, exactly. Of different things. So, we even we have the big flower crowns that we do,
which are absolutely stunning.
That's one of our big staple pieces recently.
It's just gorgeous. Not even just for weddings, but I imagine weddings, right? But like, they're just absolutely stunning.
Yeah, everybody loves them. I mean, Halloween's especially big. People get them for Halloween, for their costumes, and I always wear one at the markets too. But they're amazing. And a lot of people, when they buy them, people come back to me and they tell me, I felt so beautiful wearing this. Like, somebody will buy it for an event or something, and they're like, I got so many compliments on it. I felt absolutely stunning. I felt like a goddess. Like, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what it's about. So we make those. I mean, I still make my feather quills, which I actually used to do before doing this business, just as a side gig. So I still make those.
And then you can actually write with those.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so with that, we do a little focus on functional art too. We believe in the ability to have something that is both an art piece and functionality to it too. So for instance, my husband hand forges copper cauldrons, and they're beautiful aesthetically to just display, but they're also extremely functional. And so a lot of people will use them for like alchemy bowls where they'll burn their sigils. Some people put salt in it and put their candles in it, or their incense. Some people just use them as decorative pieces.
Coming up.
Exactly. I mean, and they become so popular because of that dual purpose. Everyone's like, it looks so beautiful on my altar. And then they're like, it works so wonderful for this. And copper itself is a huge like energy conductor. So
Yes.
a lot of people use copper when they're working with herbs and candles, incense, crystals, that kind of stuff, because the idea is that it helps intensify whatever energy workings, you are already working with.
Well,
so
sign me up.
yeah.
I treated myself for Christmas.
Yeah,
Early Christmas present. That's
they're
incredible.
very nice. Yeah, so we do a wide range of things. I mean, it's really dependent on what we are inspired by at the time, what we kind of learn to do just in our own time and on our own craft. For the most part, everything we do make is something that we actually utilize in our own rituals in our own home, however we want. So everything is like authentic in that way. You know what I mean?
Amazing. Well, you are the truth, like for real. Like Courtney, speaking about that this is the real thing.
Thank you.
The real deal. But tell us more about, because I know I got it wrong initially, that I mistakenly, when we did our first ad read, gosh, over about a year ago, and we were launching Bewitch Banter, I assumed, and that's my bad, I assumed Wiccan. So tell us, correct us, set the record straight, please. What is your actual witch practice and beliefs?
Okay.
Systems?
Well, simply said, Wiccan is witchcraft, but witchcraft isn't Wiccan.
Okay.
So it is a
Interesting.
part of it. So witchcraft is, and I'm going to talk more modern witchcraft,
Yeah, please.
because obviously it's changed in our current landscape so much. But modern witchcraft has really morphed into this ideal of sort of going against the norm, or the grain, so to speak, going against society's pressures and conditionings. A lot of people are finding themselves in witchcraft right now for a space of healing, sometimes for trying to, understand something more than themselves while also understanding more about themselves. Yeah. It's sort of also, the connection to nature is huge. People are connecting now to nature, especially now when we're talking about things
That's
like...
for you, Aga, by the way. This episode for you, because you asked for it.
Well, when
I
we're
had the best thing here for you.
Well, when we're talking about, climate change and all of these things right now and global warming, a lot of it, we are so out of touch with what our earth is, what nature is, what it's all about. And our ancestors were super in touch with nature. They relied upon it. They relied upon, their understandings of it. They relied upon their space and their places they were living in, the seasons, even the moon phases, suns, everything. Yep. So we've lost touch, I think, over the many, many a years, mostly probably since the Industrial Revolution, but we've lost touch with a lot of that. And I think what people are finding now is that as they're connecting to something as great as the earth, they're also finding something great within themselves. And they're creating then this connection where everything then becomes connected. Symbology becomes super important. Plants, animals, stones, crystals, we talk about all that kind of stuff. Even the seasons, we celebrate the Sabbats, the turning of the wheel. All of that has to do with this connection to nature. And we can connect to nature, we can connect to ourselves, and then we can connect to other people. So it spawns and blooms into, all of these different ideals. You start to share more compassion. You start to understand people and things and certain ways of things more. I like to think of the Celtics and how death was not feared. It was accepted and as honored. A part of the cycle, and it was honored, especially during, Samhain season, when we connected with our dead. We reconnected with it. Dia de los Muertos is all that. Same Halloween, thing. It's the same thing. I guess I'm thirsty now.
Cheers. Like, she made a lovely cocktail. What do you call it? It's stunning. It looks stunning and it tastes amazing.
It's a lavender lemon gin and tonic. And it's absolutely delicious.
Absolutely delicious.
Much better. But, all of these things become interconnected. And when we start to understand these connections, I think we can really open our minds to so much more in this world. And right now, we are facing a lot of things that we're trying to understand and be more open and compassionate about. Well, I'd like to say we all, but half of this country is feeling that and feeling the collective experience
Yes.
more now, along with the individual experience.
Yep.
Neither one now diminishes the other. And I think,
it's a chasm.
Yes, and I would like to say
total shift.
Yeah, and I like to, I would like to say that everybody's on that page, but so many people assume that when somebody else is doing good, they're not going to. And when we think of the collective, it diminishes the individual.
Yep.
But it doesn't. And I think that we've seen it work on so many levels where we can both have the individual experience and the elevated individual self-love, all that kind of stuff, while also having compassion for the world and thinking of the collective, thinking of your community, thinking of your society, all of those different things. So it does seep into culture so much. So for me, I'd like to say that I'm a folk witch because it loosely describes someone who works with the earth, and you could say ancient magics, you could say ancestral magic, that kind of stuff. So I do focus a little bit on Celtic paganism. I also have a patron deity that I follow closely, and that's Lilith. She's not Celtic, but there's a whole
pagan though, or what order her roots?
There's a lot.
So give us the highlights.
Probably more like ancient Sumerian.
Oh, how cool.
She's got a lot of connections with Inanna. She's also, I would say, Hebrew too, because there's a lot in the Hebrew Bible about her. There's some old stories about it. There's a lot of mythology.
That's awesome.
It goes on, so it's hard to start where, but there's a lot of depictions of her, but there's different reasons why I follow her and work with her. But a lot of my magic, is crafting with nature and with botanicals, with herbs, that kind of stuff, making those connections, utilizing the symbology of what those things represent, utilizing them for the healing purposes that they have for their folklore, so to speak, too, and legends. So that's mostly what I'm interested in. I loosely describe myself as that if I'm going to put a label on it, just because that is my focus.
Sure.
But I can tell you I'm fascinated by every aspect of the occult. So then when we talk about witchcraft as a whole, it very much ranges. So there are some people who don't actually practice witchcraft. Their version of practicing witchcraft is activism. So they manifest positive outcomes through their activism. So some witches, that's their witchcraft.
Quick anecdote, my sister is an OBGYN, and she is also a public health professional, obviously focused on women's health, and which is one of the many reasons she never moved to Arizona, because she can't be an abortion provider here, especially not now. But she's recently, in the last month or so, she's like, Chris, I want to get a tattoo. And I was like, whoa, okay, cool, that's badass. And her idea is the uterus shape, but the outline of the flowers that used to induce natural abortions. And I was like, that is so witchy of you, and I love it, and I'm here for it. And a side note is, to your point, that's how she practices, even though she's a physician. And I would consider that now in this conversation a form of magic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the idea. I think, there's parts of witchcraft too that talk about this idea of manifestation. And, when we talk about manifestation, we don't talk about poof and you've got something. We talk about the idea of setting an intention, putting in the work, working towards that thing, and getting an outcome. And if you don't get that outcome, reflecting and maybe taking a different path or looking for a different outcome, so it's all work. It's not that we're sitting here and burning herbs. And I've had people ask me this, like, what does it look like when you do a spell? Do things appear? And I was like,
I love it.
Not unless I'm tripping on something. Like, no, it's not really like that. You can have divine experience without, the apparitions or anything like that people just assume. And a lot of ritual that's taken place, at least in my household, is more blessings, protection, honoring things, honoring people we've lost, honoring people we have, that kind of stuff. It's all so, but there's a lot of different types. So my point is that, when people do mix up Wicca with witchcraft. Wicca is witchcraft, and that is a part of it. But Wicca is an actual, very specified
It's actually
part
classified
of
as
witchcraft.
a religion, right?
Yes, and it's been around for a very long time
Sure.
too, and there's different subsets of it too. Some people consider it a closed, practice. Some people are solo practitioner Wiccans, but it is a lot more of a specified part of witchcraft. And it kind of, even witchcraft itself is pagan, but paganism isn't necessarily witchcraft, because pagan kind of then opens up in a larger umbrella, because it's pretty much anything that isn't necessarily like Christian.
God forbid.
Yeah,
we talk a lot about
it's even a little bit more specific than that. Yeah, so
how bad the Catholics are. Oh my God!
But that's the part too.
You're
is there's the other,
down with the Catholics.
But you got to understand too that even in Catholic religion, there are mystics. There are people who, since ancient
I was
times,
raised Roman Catholic.
Yeah,
my mom basically said, do what you want, but this is how you'll get a little, CCD and then peace out.
But isn't it funny how we talk about how spells are bad, but yet Catholics are so deep-seated in their ritualism and their iconography and their symbolism. Yeah, like all of that kind of stuff.
Messages, spirits, angels.
So the idea is that, mysticism, witchcraft, all of it seeps into so many cultures, so many religions, so many things. And I think in modern times, the best way you can describe it is somebody, going against their established norm, going against their preconditioning, reconditioning themselves to believe in something more about themselves and other things. And that's not to say that people who aren't involved in, witchcraft or paganism, don't do that and don't transcend in other ways. But I think for people who are spiritualists and want to attach themselves to something bigger, and the biggest part too is the autonomy. Yes. When we talk about institutionalized religions, everything has a set how to do things, how you have to be. Yep. With witchcraft, specifically with witchcraft, I'm not going to say with paganism, but with witchcraft specifically, there's so much autonomy. So when we talk about green witches, kitchen witches, folk witches, even people just don't define themselves and just they're a witch, when we talk about all of those things, it's because people are taking the control back within themselves and creating their own path and their own way of spirituality or mysticism or whatever it is that they attach to. So long-winded answer.
So beautifully said, and thank you for clarifying, because I know I broad stroked the brush like so many of us do, right? Unfortunately, the old Catholic lens and other major religions are really what get the attention, or have gotten the attention for so many centuries. And I think it's so funny. What you just said about autonomy, God, I forgot what episode it was. It might have been voodoo. My ex actually practiced Santeria, and I was really a very blessed, very few American white person to actually be I was never indoctrinated, so I'm not going to go that far, but I was shown a lot more than the average white person into that religion. Yeah. And it was really fucking cool. That said, I have a patron saint as well, Elewa, and he's a boy prince in that lore, and he's the king of like pathways, and again owning my autonomy of which way I'm gonna go. Exactly. And you said it so beautifully. So I have his statue, and I have my altar, which with your stunning pentagram.
Thank you.
Oh my God, it's stunning. I shared it before, I'll share it again, but made by this right here. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, just like I think people in that episode that I covered, voodoo, nowadays are searching for answers because we're sick. We're a sick culture because and that's why we have the violence and the things that happen because, I think mental health has never been addressed at the root. And I think witchcraft is a form of people taking that DIY sense and autonomy back.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, absolutely. And, I think too that sometimes we find ourselves in a, certain crossroad, so to speak, where we're like, okay, what direction are we going to go? I can tell you I found witchcraft through healing, through needing to heal, through needing to have the semblance of ritual and connection to something more.
Because it was after college, right? When you came to Witchcraft?
Yeah. I mean, I had been active in it when I was a teenager, and then I kind of stepped out of it for a long time, and I came back into it about 5 or 6 years ago. You know, I was personally not in a good place in my life. I was going through a lot of depression, and I was trying to find something to, you know, poetry wasn't enough for me at the time. It wasn't, I needed another.
She's a phenomenal writer too, y'all.
Thank you.
I'm just lifting Courtney up. Please say.
True. But it was something I turned to because I was looking for ritual. And I started with the Sabbats because it gave me a good semblance of the wheel and how the seasons work.
And so for mine, sorry, is that those are the rituals or those the
Sabbats are the holidays.
Okay.
So like our next one coming up will be Yule. We just got done with Samhain, which is the same night as Halloween. Yule is the same night as Christmas Eve. Basically, the pagans had divided the year into essentially 4 holidays, 4 fire festivals that we know of. And then they later, I think the Wiccans actually, and Robert Graves is actually a writer, and he created a lot of ideas about the triple goddess head and sort of wrote on a lot of that stuff. But at that time, too, they had incorporated the solstices and the equinoxes into it, too. So you have a total of 8 seasons. So the cycle starts with Yule, which is what's coming up next. Then we have Imbolc, Ostera, Beltana.
Hi, Kitty. Say hi.
Beltana, Letha, Lughnasadh, and then Mabon and Samhain. So they're all the 8 Sabbats. So the idea is that when they were being basically celebrated in Europe at the time, these were the different times that the wheel had turned, the seasons had changed. So it also goes based on the sun positioning. Farming was a big one too. So like Lughnasadh is usually the very first harvest in Northern Europe. And that's where they harvest their grains. And then in Mabon, they're harvesting, you know, fruits from the orchards and pumpkins and things like that. So it goes based on like different harvests and stuff. But what you can do in modern times is you can sort of take that, like, we're in Arizona. We have 0. I mean, we've got like 3 seasons. But
and don't give me that bullshit go up north because that's not New England.
In Phoenix, at least, it's like, so how do you celebrate, you know, an entire wheel when, you know, we kind of skip fall in a sense. You know, we kind of skip some of these in a sense. The idea is taking the ideas from each season and applying it to where we are now. So then you can kind of discover parts of yourself too. Certain seasons you thrive in versus times that you don't. People back east, they always talk about, what is it during winter?
Winter depression?
Seasonal affective disorder.
There it is. I was called winter depression.
I discovered,
that's so clinical.
Well, in Arizona, I discovered my seasonal affective disorder happens during the summertime because it's so extraordinarily hot
and
here.
You're stuck inside.
And so the difference is you start to learn where you're at and stuff, and you know how you work with the seasons too, specifically. If you know, you thrive better during one season or another. And then as you're celebrating them, you can sort of prepare for the seasons and all that kind of stuff. So that was sort of my first, you know, dive into it all. And it also helped me because it helped me with correspondences and symbolism. So talking about, you know, what herbs are good for protection. Well, you've got bloodroot, you've got rosemary, you've got sage, you've got mugwort, you've got all of these different things that are good for that. And so you start to learn those different correspondences. Well, what about for stones for protection? Well, you've got black tourmaline, you've got crystal quartz. So you can start making these, again, connections. And they just start, once you start learning about and noticing one, you you start opening up so cool. Many more, and it just becomes incredible learning about all these different things. So that's the other thing, is reading and sharing knowledge, listening, all of those things, which is also something that we can apply in modern times in our daily lives. So exactly.
Listening to people. There's a
thought. So there's a lot, but amazing. I mean, that would be, you know, I think the other thing too is that people are just now starting to talk about this kind of witchcraft. And so it's no fault of yours really that you did not have that differentiation with Wicca and just witchcraft in general, because to be honest, a lot of it has been saturated in Wiccan religion, especially in the 90s. It was a big trend. Wiccans were.
And the devil worship or satanic panic was more 80s,
that was more 80s, But yeah, I mean, it's it's a lot different now, but I think people are now starting to have these conversations about what is witchcraft now. And it really boils down to this idea of autonomy and finding autonomy over your own spirituality.
Take the church. Take me to nature church. Yeah, that amazing. Really, only 5 years ago, huh? I feel like time is, COVID time messed everything up, right? But I feel like you've been practicing for like more on the verge of 10 years, but it's really only been 5 or so?
Yeah, I mean, probably, gosh, where are we now?
I know, where exactly?
I mean, it's probably been about 6 years since I started Crimson Sage. And then I was practicing before that for about 6 months before I even started. But what's great about, running the shop too is that I always believe that that is my witchcraft also, is creating these things to then turn around and give somebody else something else to use for their intention or their magic or their healing.
So proud of you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, that said, let's talk about women's autonomy, right? Because so much of this, I feel like women obviously are searching, especially right now with Roe overturned, for our autonomy. And do you find in your practice there are more women or men? Or do you, I mean, just anecdotally, obviously, no data needed, but like, just do you find that more women are drawn to it because of our need to do that healing work?
Well, first off, I want to preface what I'm going to say by saying that my social circle when it comes to it is very specific.
Okay.
So I can't speak to, other communities. Sure. Yeah. In my community and circle, it is predominantly female. There are a lot of men. That's not to say there aren't a lot of men. And then of course there's a lot of non-binary people and trans people involved too. So, but I do find that there are a lot more women involved, just at least in my circle. And, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I do think that in other areas and in other circles, it's probably predominantly men. The other thing too that we can think of is just like with a lot of other things, the idea of mysticism and the occult and witchcraft was predominantly dominated by men and the white male patriarchy. Yep. And a lot of it was, I mean, if we talk about Crowley and, even Gardner and a lot of those people who did run these orders or these, sort of occult
we
groups
have a whole
or whatever.
Episode on Alistair, let me tell you.
I mean,
we called him the sex crazed rocketeer.
And there's a lot of grooming that gets involved in it. There's a lot of assault that can occur. And people always say, like, for instance, certain groups that require initiation rites, you have to be wary of, because there are some groups out there trying to take advantage of people, especially young women, or vulnerable people in general. Exactly. So, it has for many years, like everything. I mean, we even talk about poetry, and some people wonder about that too and say, are there more women writing poetry than men now? They've asked me that before, and I said, I don't think so. But I'm going to say, with witchcraft, what I say about poetry is it once was predominantly a patriarchal thing. Men controlled the mysticism and the occult and all that kind of stuff. And they took advantage of a lot of women in the process. When we're talking about witchcraft now too, we're also taking back our autonomy. We're taking back the word witch, which is also, that's another thing I've experienced is somebody has said to me, isn't witchcraft an offensive term? No, not nowadays, because witch is a word that has been taken back by people who are creating their own sense of autonomy and their own path and their own spirituality and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's no right or wrong way. There's people who will try to gatekeep, but there's no gatekeeping allowed in witchcraft, because there's so nature. Much, and it goes against the freedom and the autonomy that you get to experience in witchcraft. I do think that we always should be careful, and we should always practice our magic with the consent of anybody else involved. Exactly. But that's again why it's so much different now than back in the early 1900s when we talk about the occult and the different orders and things like that. You know, we even talk about like Freemasons and stuff like that, and they're predominantly men. Yes, exactly.
Which apparently my grandfather was one. Honestly, we don't have full-on confirmation, but I do have an anecdote that at his funeral, there was a guy running around, an elderly gentleman that was like livid, yelling at my aunt, who was essentially my grandparents' caretaker and everything. So at his service, this guy was like, "This is not how Masons need to be buried," and he was like carrying on, and I was like, gosh. I guess this is confirmation. Maybe he was. Who knows?
Yeah, first rule of Freemasonry is you don't talk about Freemasonry.
Exactly. Like, come on, bro.
Yeah,
there is no Fight Club.
But that's, I mean, essentially what, when we talk about, you know, the occult, and we talk about witchcraft, and we talk about Wicca, and we talk about all of these things, they were predominantly, you know, white male. And now when we go back to ancient cultures, there's a lot more matriarchies. There's a lot more matriarchies. There are, you know, lots of ancient cultures, indigenous cultures especially, prided the women, and everybody had a semblance of equality throughout, you know, but women were held on more of a pedestal than they are now. And so I think that's what we're doing now, is we're taking back our own power while also, you know, sort of learning from the mistakes of our ancestors and the people before us. And that's why I think, you know, when it comes down to it, I think a lot of women and non-binary folk are finding themselves drawn to witchcraft now, because it's a beautiful, delicious idea. I mean, wouldst thou like to live deliciously? Yes, I mean, thou would love to live deliciously, you know, like, exactly. But that, the experience of that is, you know, finding yourself, finding your true self in a world that is so large and vast and uncontrollable. The other aspect is finding what you can control in your life amongst the world with so many things you can't control. So again, it's all that taking back power. I think, though, I would like to say that I do think a lot of men are also getting into it for similar reasons. We talk about men having been sort of groomed in their lives to be, you know, this masculine trope that,
cry,
you know,
strong,
exactly. And, you know, you can't believe in that kind of stuff because it's girly, or you can't do that kind of stuff. God
forbid, it's feminine.
Yeah, so I think a lot of men are finding themselves in it now too, because men are saying, well, I don't need to be that way. I can find pride in myself and people around me regardless of gender or any kind of differentiation, really. You know, it's the big thing is we should be accepting one another and connecting to one another while also celebrating each other's differences. And I think witchcraft does that. And again, the conversation is really just opening up about this. There's a lot of people starting to talk about this. You know, Pam Grossman's a big one, I'm sure.
Actually, tell us about her.
So she does Witch Wave podcast, actually, but she's a writer too. But she's very, I guess you could say, prolific in, you know, the witchcraft community around the world and stuff, and talks a lot about it. But she talks a lot about, you know, these ideas of autonomy and things like that. But I think more and more people, you know, you've got Juliet Diaz, The Altar Within. Her book is very much about, you know, reclaiming that semblance of power and decolonizing yourself from, you know, all of these ideas that have been pushed upon us, you know.
Which is, you know, kind of also plays into exactly what you're saying, like generational trauma. That shit's in your blood. That shit's in your cells, DNA, your cellular DNA. And just to bring it back to like a medical standpoint, even to the point where my sister, the physician, was saying that people of color have often been more associated with diabetes. Well, guess what? It's because of all the generational trauma. It's not, and it's physically showing up, and they're just starting to test this now, like doing studies of like generational trauma on the impacts of medical illnesses.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is. And I mean,
I believe it. That's because at the root of the trauma. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I
of course,
believe
being an enslaved person is going to fuck you up.
And, you know, I think as white people, it's more important for us now to decolonize ourselves from these preconceptions that unfortunately are inherent within us. But, you know, I believe a lot of times, you know, the first step is acknowledging it and, trying to do better, learn, listen. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it all coincides, those connections.
Yes.
Back with witchcraft, you're listening, you're learning, you're
Mm-hmm.
sharing knowledge, you're doing right by yourself and the collective. What is that? If we're all happy, we're all
better.
happy, we're all elevated, we're all better.
Yep.
There's lots of people who don't want that. But if we as an individual take that and take that power back, who knows? It might become more of a collective force out there. And I think it has, actually. I think it has. I think it's just starting to get there more, But yeah, that's why it's absolutely fascinating to me. And there's lots of great conversations being had about it. And one thing I would say to people who are getting into witchcraft is, don't let people gatekeep, but beware. Be aware of people taking advantage of you, just like in any situation. Any situation.
Amy would appreciate that. Our skeptic, right, Amy? Be aware. But yeah, oh my God, beautifully, beautifully said. Anything else you wanted to add or share? I mean, you're so eloquent. Thank you for sharing your practice, at least telling us about it. Just sharing with it, because again, to your earlier points, I think people maybe used to be afraid of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Afraid to express it because of the stigma.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think many people, I've heard many people say things like, "Oh, I take my pentagram star off before I go do family events and stuff because I don't want them to know," and stuff like that. And here I am. I mean, look at my home, and I've got family events all the time, and I've got goddesses up, I've got statues up, and I've come to the point where this is just me and this is my life. And the interesting thing about it is I really do like bringing clarity to it. And it's happened before, like where my dad has flat out asked me, like, what does it mean that you're a witch? And I've expressed it to him in this way and told him a lot of these things. And he's like, oh, I had no idea. He's like, I really did not think that that's what it all was. And so I want to bring clarity because yes, there are people out there doing the spells. There are people out there, they're doing different things based on their practice, their culture, whatever it is that they're doing. But then there's also people who are utilizing witchcraft for a different purpose. And, you also have the new age scene. You've got a lot of people who are very spiritual and the self-healing and that kind of stuff. And we also have all these different cultures that are doing different things too. So also be self-aware of your culture. This is where history, reading, ancestry. I recommend doing your DNA thing if you don't know your ancestry or background. Like,
have you done yours?
All that stuff. No, but my grandma and Tucker my husband have kept very detailed and intricate family trees that go back so far. So we have a good idea of different parts that we come from, that I come from specifically. But like my mom is a 4th generation English, basically, so we know like enough to at least hone in sort of on the Northern European part of it. But my husband also has some different parts of him too. So it's like, we should be also, really staying in our lane, I'd like to say about that. For instance, I wouldn't practice hoodoo or anything because that's a very specific practice for specific cultures,
Yeah, which is why I was flabbergasted and honored at the same time to even get the little bit of curtain peeking.
Yeah, because they're so closed sometimes.
Very much. I remember flat out his dad was like, when he moved here from Connecticut to here, they brought over all the santos that were saints, and I was like, oh, your dad just getting your saints out of the trunk or whatever, and he's like, how do you know about that? I'm like, I'm not blind, bro. I'm a smart woman. I read and I love culture. But he's like, you must never look inside the vases, which were part of the altar, and I never did because I respect that shit.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna fuck with it.
Right,
like that's you. That's sacred to you. Yeah, I'm not gonna cross that line.
I mean, there are certain, there's a talk too that goes on right now about closed practice versus open practice.
Oh, interesting. The little debate situation.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I don't know. I think in some aspects it's a debate for certain things for certain people. But some things are more like just what I'm talking about. Like, I'm not going to go and try and be a hoodoo priestess because guess what? I could never authentically be a hoodoo priestess. I couldn't, And there are so many authentic voodoo priestesses out there and voodoo priestesses that are doing amazing things. Exactly. So I would never be authentically that, you know? And so a lot of witchcraft too, the whole idea is you're taking your autonomy, you're finding your authenticity. So how are you going to do that if you're going to, you know, reappropriate a culture's closed practice or ritual practice into your own? So another good example we can talk about is indigenous tribes, and especially certain Native American tribes practiced smudging, which is a very closed ritual in a lot of Native American practices. Smudging with white sage, to be specifically.
They sell that shit everywhere here in the desert.
Yes,
y'all.
yes.
And it's like, ooh.
And there's a lot of talk about, so I like to make herbal bundles too. I make them out of different things, you know, you can see some hanging over there.
Beautiful. And I'm like,
but I make them out of different things. I don't call them smudge bundles. I call them herbal bundles because that's what they are. Smudge bundle is reserved to that very specific tool for that very specific practice. So there's a lot of people, and there's a big debate about this. Personally, I agree that smudge is a closed practice, and mine are herbal bundles. That's authentically what they are. When an indigenous person has a smudge bundle, that is authentically theirs, you know? It's very much like that. So, you know, it's difficult to say because, again, I don't police anybody and I don't gatekeep anybody, but there are a lot of people who commodify off of white sage smudge bundles.
Yes.
And they call it that. And they're white ladies like us, you know, selling these things. There are other terms for it. There are other types of herbs that we can use, you know? And so the other thing is being true to yourself, being true to your surroundings. How can, in Arizona, how can you utilize your desert? How can you utilize, how can you utilize herbs that maybe in your own ancestral heritage were, you know, important herbs for different things? So it's very much like that. That's a really good example I can give when it comes to like that idea of closed practice. And, you know, it does take it a step further when people are commodifying off of, you know, a very closed ritual tool or practice. That's the other thing is when we're talking about authenticity and we're talking about autonomy when it comes down to it, you have to stay in your lane because that is the only way you're going to be your authentic self. And that's researching, learning, doing the DNA thing if you have to, talking to your family, doing your family tree, all that kind of stuff to really get a good grasp of where you come from. Otherwise, none of your magic is going to be authentic and none of it's going to work great for you. So,
amazing. Amazing. Well, we will see. Well, I won't see you because I'll be away, unfortunately. But you'll be at Witchcrafted AZ, right? Tell us a little about that, and then wrap that up. Wrap this up.
Well, Witchcrafted is a big event that was actually created by Dory of a small business here called Hentooth Cottage. She actually made really cool altar cloths and linens out of like vintage linens and doilies and things like that.
Cool.
So she was very active in the market scene and created Witchcraft several years ago before the pandemic even hit. And it started off as just a small event and there were like 15 tables out, you know, and we were selling. It was tremendous. The very first night we ever did it, seeing how many people in the community in Phoenix it brought out. I mean, there were hundreds of people crowded on this patio bar shopping and looking at stuff. People came dressed up. People came all decked out. And it was right before Halloween too. So people are coming dressed up as different witches.
Sure.
You've got people just coming in their usual gothic garb and coming out and being themselves. And so
cool.
We were on a tremendous high from it of just like, wow, this community is great. Look how many people it brought out in Phoenix. So then the second one we did was the Yule Market, and it was at a different location. And it was much larger. And then it brought out even more people to the point where now after the pandemic and everything, it started up again last year. It's 3 times a year. There's an Ostera one that happens usually in March. The Samhain one, which is Halloween essentially, happens in October usually. And then Yule or Christmas is in December. And so we do them 3 times a year. Dory does them 3 times a year. We participate in all of them for the most part. And now they're at Glendale Civic Center in downtown Glendale.
Huge.
It brings in thousands of people. I mean, we are talking this last market we had for Halloween. It was wrapped around the building for a couple hours to even get in because that's how many people showed up.
It's incredible.
Totally worth it. There's probably a good 80 vendors that are there, including tarot readers and other diviners. Yeah, I mean, and the vendors are incredible. I mean, we have 3 spaces of our own, so we take up a good amount of space. So it's people know where we are at, and they always go there. But there's also a lot of great vendors there that are all selling different types of ritual tools and skincare products and handcrafted items, vintage items, everything with sort of that. Dory likes to represent the archetype of the witch and what the witch represents. So she chooses vendors that really cater to that ideal and that feel and that sense of authenticity.
Yes.
So there's a lot of great vendors. You know, a couple of my favorites are Shadow Path Parlor, Moon Goddess Market, Eternal Noir Jewelry. She's very prolific in the Phoenix area. Spellbinding. I guess I'm just giving shout outs.
Well, Court, it's been such a freaking pleasure. No more shout outs for others, but shout out to Crimson Sage, AZ, my girl Courtney Jameson. She will not be at the Witchcrafted Astara Market in March, on March 11th at the Glendale Civic Center. Again, that's Witchcrafted Astara's Market. Courtney is usually there. However, she will be missing the spring one. But we are hoping Bewitch Banter will be there as well. So you can come along March 11th and see Amy and I hopefully at the Glendale Civic Center as part of the Witchcrafted AZ Market.
Thanks for listening. Check us out on Instagram or bewitchbanter.com. Suggestions for the show? Email us at bewitchbanter@gmail.com. Credits, music Phantom Fun by Jonathan Boyle from premiumbeat.com. Podcast edited and produced by Krista Hins and Amy Holt. As always, if you enjoyed, please rate, review, and subscribe.